Hello and welcome to Cab Chat. And this week we have Lee DeCosta from blackcab.com and Cabvision along to answer any questions and our questions about the new app. So welcome to the show, Lee.
Jamie, good to be on.
So tell us a little bit about how you came to acquire blackcab.com, because it was originally the Unify app, wasn't it?
That's correct, yes. Mickey from Unify is a Cabvision customer. Not someone that I knew very well, but I was obviously aware of the app and the way that he'd set it up and what he wanted to bring to the marketplace. So we kind of like the structure of the app without knowing, too much about it really. I mean, we'd had some conversations with previous people about being involved in apps, and we shied away from it because at the end of the day, we're payment people. That's how it all started for us, really. Having sort of probably gone as far as what we can go with payment within taxi. We were just wondering what the next vertical was for us. And someone mentioned to me that, Mickey had probably taken Unify as far as he could, didn't want to deal with corporates per se, but it might be a good point for him to sort of step away from the project. And basically I just called him, we had a conversation, I told him, what we thought, what the future could hold. He thought that was a good idea. We struck a deal where we could take over the Unify app. A lot of the reason behind taking over Unify was so that we didn't bring, another app into the marketplace. So you'll be very alive to the fact that people say like, well, how many of these apps do we need? We just need one app. We need one trade app. I'm teaching you to suck eggs because I've heard certain conversations take place, and I completely agreed with that. I mean, the last thing that this marketplace needed was, another new entry into the marketplace. So we took Unify, which was a micro business, doing very small amounts of business with a view to rebranding it, which Mickey was absolutely fine with. I mean, the Unify brand, is or was a relatively small brand within the taxi marketplace. We'd already invested 4 years ago into the blackcab.com domain name with a view that we may get to this point where we want to do something. With sort of Mickey's blessing, we said that we're gonna rebrand it. We're gonna go out with effectively the USP, which is that we're a black cab centric business. We'll stick the name down the side, and it shouldn't be too complicated for the consumer to know what our offering is, and that's kind of how it came about.
Was the fact that Taxi World started the Jump app, was that also an impetus for you to look towards starting an app to run alongside sort of the payment processing side of the business as well?
We've been looking at taxi apps since 2012, I think. I was for a very brief period of time a director of My Taxi, the original London company. I met the two guys that had founded it. They were working with Mercedes-Benz. We were working with Mercedes-Benz through KPM. They decided they didn't want to go ahead with it. So in the end, realistically, I was never involved in, My Taxi from when it launched in the UK They went a different route, but it was just something that was kind of at the back of my mind. And as I said, like in 21, we thought that we might do this. I had spoken with Jill from Taxi World and a few other people in the marketplace. We all believed that what was happening with the corporate apps was very damaging to the trade. Um, and so it was no surprise to me that Taxi App launched an app, and it would be no surprise to them that we also did exactly the same thing, because we'd been talking about it for a number of years, between the two of us.
So, I mean, the way that Taxi World works is obviously you've got to have their equipment um, to have the app, and they're quite high processing fees, and they earn their money out of the processing fees. So you've got to be within their sort of ecosystem to be able to um, be on the app. With blackcab.com, you're offering the app to the whole trade. Yeah, the driver doesn't necessarily need to use your card processing system. So how are you going to earn money from the drivers that are not using your card processing system?
I mean, what you're seeing now effectively is the V1 version of the app. I mean, if you take Unify as V1 and the Black Cab rebranding as V2, we've already got a V3, which will be coming out in the next few months, which will start introducing the booking fee again. And we've been very clear about this from the get go. We don't believe that we need to charge the driver. We believe that the £2 booking fee suffices in what we want to do. We've also looking at a subscription based model for regular users. So we've kind of got that mapped out as like the VIP section. So rather than the customer pay the booking fee, they can pay like a fixed monthly subscription and use as many cabs as they want. And that's the route that we've decided that we will go down, like an open platform. We don't need to have every single customer having our card system on board. I mean, there will be in-app payment. In-app payment will also have a processing fee. So if the customer wants to have card on file, and prefer to use that rather than use the system within the vehicle, in Cabvision at that point, which would be the partner of Black Cab, would make a small processing fee out of settling the payment to the driver. At the moment, the way it works is that the customer books the taxi and pays the driver, and if that's a Cabvision customer, great, we will earn a small margin out of that. And if it's not, that's no big deal, because we're establishing the marketplace at the moment. And sometimes you have to pay to play in this marketplace, and you don't make money from day one. We need to prove the concept, gain the trust of customers who are not Cabvision customers, and obviously, most importantly, try and win over the consumer. We don't think that the current app is quite there. It's a considerable step up to the Unify product, but it's the hailing ecosystem is really complex. And I knew this way back when, having spoken to sort of architecture, like people who had designed the architecture for hailing apps. But until you really start getting involved in these things yourself on a granular basis, you don't understand it. And it's not complex. I mean, what you're doing is relatively standard. I mean, how many people give you an A to B product, whether or not it's a taxi service or a food delivery service? There's just so many people doing it. Some are doing it obviously far better than others. Some have got stronger brands, bigger budgets, etc. But payment is far more complicated from a regulatory point of view, but it's also relatively simple. So once you've got payment sorted out, there's no bells and whistles with payment. There's nothing fancy that you can do. You end up with maybe 12 screens or something within your app. These, like the payment window, it's a regulated window. You can't adjust it. You have to display your font at a certain size. You can only say so much. So you're working in the confines of the regulation. And then you move into the taxi app side of it. And then you look at sort of like, for every action, there's a reaction. So for whatever you're telling the driver, the passenger's got to see something. For everything the passenger's seeing, the driver's got to see something. Then there's the stuff in the middle. And we've found that quite challenging to knit it all together. It's hundreds of screens that I wouldn't say that we sort of mispriced the task in hand, as it were. But the more you delve into it, the more that you can add. And so when we got the Unify app and we started looking at it, it was pretty good from a UX point of view, but it wouldn't scale properly. So then we rebuilt it, where obviously now we're still testing it. We're only 2 months into the new app, and yet we've already got like 20 or 30 things internally that we're like, we could do this better. So we're rebuilding a lot of the architecture all over again, because this is new to us. So it's not new to the consumer. I mean, what have they been having apps now for maybe 15 years? And we're not going to really be doing anything hugely different to anyone else. I mean, it's easier to impersonate than it is to innovate. Innovation is incredibly expensive, and obviously small companies like ourselves, we might be a big taxi company, but in the grand scheme of things, as a payment company, we're very small. As a corporation, we're not quite there. We're just a big taxi company in our own little ecosystem. With a finite amount of customers, which is now limited to sort of less than 15,000. And then you're looking at sort of like potential of millions of consumers. So we've never had a consumer app before. What does the passenger see with the current Cabvision app? They don't download anything on the phone. They just go to the payment terminal and tap their phone. So we've had to learn a lot about consumer behaviour. About sort of where we're going to put our marketing. Sort of like getting as much bang for our buck as we possibly can. But most importantly, we need to win the trust of the consumer that we're able to provide a service. And that is a real challenge for anyone in the taxi trade, because at the end of the day, no one controls the driver, maybe other than their partner. So, you go to work because your wife or husband says you need to go to work, and you go and do the things that you want to do, and you're not going to do anything that Black Cab says that you should do, or Free Now, or whoever or even Uber in this day and age. The driver's an enigma, their own personality, and your customer wants you to guarantee a service, and you just simply can't. So you just got to do the best that you can, and we feel that the best that we can do is making it free to the driver. So there's absolutely no financial penalty for doing the job. In fact, coming through the app and knowing that person has verified themselves and they've got card details registered and whatever, you'd like to think that the driver sees that as a benefit. Rather than just picking someone randomly up in the street that could be drunk or could be a problem. You got to, it's a judgment call at your end. And I know historically, that with the old radio circuits, you'd have people that would just exclusively work because they valued the quality of that work. And, in some aspects we need to replicate that, and that's why we've gone with the tiering system, with our sort of like virtual hand, which is really like an unverified user. So that's as close to a street how as it is. You see someone, it's close enough for you to run to, you pick them up, they might not be a great person, you have a trouble with them, there's nothing we can do there because we don't really know who they are. We've got their phone number, we don't have their card details, we don't have their home address. And as I said, that's just a random encounter between two people via a platform. The next step of that would be a verified user, and that verified user would end up paying a booking fee. The driver would understand that's a verified person, so that's a person that's gone out of their way to to provide their details, to give their home address, to give their email, suggests that there's a bit more about that person, that they're a bit can be trusted. And we would like to think that the driver would run a little bit further to go and get that person because, they've made a conscious effort to register everything they can into that application. And then our third tier of person would be the subscriber, which would be our VIP customer, because that customer would obviously be a regular taxi user. So you should know what to expect from them, and they should know what to expect from you. And that's how we're setting our stall out to try and do things slightly differently.
I mean, well, everything you've said there definitely resonates with me, with the way I would like to work an app, Lee, verified customers for a start, because when someone's verified themselves, I think they're more likely to stand and wait for the cab to turn up rather than, if they're just a random virtual howl and then a cab comes past in the street, they'll probably put their hand out and then cancel the cab on the app. But if they're a verified customer, they're more likely to wait for the cab that they've booked rather than seeing one and then just thinking, oh, I'll cancel that one and hail the cab off the street, And the VIP customer, I mean, it all sounds great to me. What would you say to the drivers out there that have registered on the app and they seem to think that there should be an abundance of work on there straight away? I mean, I'm quite, I understand that you've got to build it. You've got to get a mass of drivers first before you can even think about attracting customers onto the app. Because if you haven't got the drivers and the customers try to use the app and they can't get a cab, that's it. You've lost them. They might try again, and if they failed the second time, they're going to go elsewhere. So, you've got to get the driver base first before you can get the customer base. But some drivers seem to think that as soon as they sign on, it should be offering them work all the time. And that's obviously not the case. You've got to build it. I mean, what would your message be to those drivers?
I just want to add on there, sorry, as well, that just secondary to that question, where is the customers kind of coming from? I mean, that must be a huge logistical mindset in yourself, where to target and how to market customers. So I'd be really interested to know, if you wish to share it, Lee, how are you sort of approaching that mammoth task of trying to find new customers for the platform as well? So just as an add-on there to what Jamie said, I guess.
Yeah, look, I mean, in driver expectation, we're just going to foul with that, because the expectations are just so high and unachievable. I mean, someone come in the other day and basically said I haven't had a job. This ain't good enough. And we're saying well, what's the downside? Downside was he downloaded an app, opened it up, it's not burning through your data and whatever. And the guy goes, oh, I haven't turned it on. Oh, sorry. And he goes, no, just sort of, just wondered how it was going, and I've got it, but I haven't used it. And we're saying, well, it's not going to get very far if everyone else who signed up's got the same viewpoint as that. That you're not gonna try it. You turned it on once, and now you've turned it off, and now you're asking us how it's going. I mean, it's the classic chicken and egg, isn't it? I mean, you already said it, Jamie. So we went out, and for a month we basically just onboarded drivers. Yeah. And we onboarded more drivers than what Unify had within that within the first 2 week period, right? So I'm not going to go into driver numbers, and then obviously the challenge is trying to keep drivers logged into the app. Um, everyone has that issue if you're an app-based business, right? Have you got the app on, or have you not? Now, if we was to integrate into the Cabvision system, then we would have automatically more people on, because everyone needs their payment system on during the course of the day. But we've deliberately stayed away from having Cabvision and Black Cab being the same company because of the HMRC reporting requirements. So, as you know, if you're dispatching work to people, you've got a duty to report that. And when we settle people's card payments, we don't have a duty to report that. And for some of our customers, that seems to be quite important. So we decided that we would keep that absolute distinction between the two. So yes, it would be easier for us if we would have sort of made a tile within the Cabvision app to have more drivers in straight away. We can opt our customers in, opt our customers out, but we thought it was better to have a completely standalone business, that's dedicated to doing one thing, just like Cabvision is dedicated to doing one thing via their app, which is obviously payment. So customers, obviously jobs are going through on the platform. It's a slow burn. The marketplace over Easter, I think, has been incredibly difficult. I don't actually remember 2 weeks sort of like back to back over the last few weeks, that have been as bad really since sort of COVID. When you was coming out of COVID, you're expecting that slow kind of build up, and then we had that real mad boom in May, and I think, if I remember rightly, I think we had a record month, from sort of like zero to sort of like the biggest month that we'd ever had, because of like the pent up demand of people coming back into the marketplace. And by and large, like the last sort of 2 or 3 years, the kipper season has not been too bad. Obviously it's seasonal, and your September, October, November would obviously be a lot better than your January, February, and March. But this year, it's sort of March and April seem to have been particularly bad. And so therefore, not a lot going through the app, certainly not as much as what we would have hoped for. But what is encouraging is, and getting on to answering Tom's question, is that we're signing up customers every single day, and quite a lot of that is coming from the magazine advertising that we've put in place with British Airways and with the Eurostar. But equally, people are starting to see like the super sides now out on the street. The deal that we're doing there is obviously quite attractive for people. Very low processing rates. Get a lot of your sort of mandatory, equipment included in that deal. And essentially advertise yourself, and that's starting to, sort of manifest itself with drivers when they're coming in. They're understanding what we're trying to do. We've got some more campaign stuff starting in June and July, so you'll see even more things come onto the street at that point. And also, which is a really significant thing for us, is that we've got tariff coming up. So we have we've been mailing out sort of stickers to people in the post, customers that will be coming in to get their tip seats and bits and pieces. That's one of the big things. Your customer, not my customer, your customer, just as a cabbie, gets in the back of your vehicle. They're sitting there for what we're led to believe is about 17 minutes. And they might be on their phone, or they might just be staring at your tip seats. And so for us to be putting adverts into the back of the taxi, as well as on the side of the taxi, we just need to get our brand in front of the customer. And we need the cabbie to sort of upsell us in the basis of, this app is not going to charge the customer any fee that is not regulated. So as we said, like with a verified customer, they'll pay the £2 booking fee. If they're unverified, they won't pay the booking fee. It's a much more spontaneous arrangement. But some of these apps, high tech fees, is surge pricing being dressed up,
Yeah.
booking fees, above the £2 that TFL allow, service charges. I mean, they are just like welding on costs that are really making a regulated service unaffordable. Sort of emphasize the fact to my own kids, who are all adults, like 23 to 30, that they should be using taxis, etc., blah blah blah. And my daughter booked with one particular firm. She was in Bedford Square, she was going back to Camden, and then she said, I've been charged 40 quid. I said, it's like, that's impossible. And it basically, she had a £20, let's call it surge price, on a licensed cab, which was basically like a £19 journey. She's paid 40 quid for. So it's very difficult to demand that my family spends the money in the trade if you feel like you've been ripped off in that scenario. And I'm sure that the firm that made that charge will say, well, she agreed it, and maybe she did. Maybe she did. But, being in the trade, and we're always having to justify our prices. I mean, you say something on Twitter, good or bad, someone jumps in and has got plenty to say about how expensive cabs are, and you spend more time on the golf course than you do in the cab, etc. All those old stereotypes come out. Cabbies only work 2 days a week because they're earning so much money, and all this kind of nonsense. And we've got people that are prepared to sort of like double the meter. And that is what has effectively has forced us into the marketplace. So, we sat and watched on the sideline, believed that we could do a good job, believed that we might be able to do better than other people. But eventually you can't just sit on the sidelines. We've felt that we've had to get involved because of these spurious charges, and for TFL to be saying that they can't regulate, they don't have the powers, typical TFL, just fence sitting, really. Eventually that would have a massive knock-on effect on our other businesses. Obviously, from the card revenue point of view, if people are not spending money in taxis, we can't earn any money. And if people are not spending money in taxis, we can't rent any vehicles either. So at the end of the day, I mean, I've seen some comments that people have made, and it's like, oh, they don't do nothing for nothing and whatever. And it's like, well, we don't pretend to do that. We provide a service, of which we try and get paid for it. We think it's, we have fair pricing. That's why we have thousands of customers. And we rent our vehicles at a price that, enables us to run the business, and, provide good, clean cabs that are well maintained, etc. Because we're getting a return on that investment. If we allow people to misprice the actual regulated fare, and chase our customers away, that is obviously not only going to be damaging for the driver, but the whole sort of service sector ecosystem. And I know the taxi world, they feel the same in that respect. If you're going to allow someone to charge 40 quid for a £20 journey, and then you end up being the victim because the customer goes and uses a service that they think is more affordable. And the taxi trade, someone might argue that I wanted to go somewhere for a tenner and it cost me 20 quid, but at £20 for premium service, I think most people stick with it. But at 40 quid for that same service, I don't think they do. And that's difficult to measure because, of course, you would have seen, I don't do any other social media other than Twitter, X. And you get customers come on and say, I took a cab from A to B and it come to this price, and of course everyone jumps in and starts defending that and says that can't be right, you're telling lies and blah blah blah. But maybe they have been hit with a high tech fee or a surge fee and whatever, and that person's feeling pretty aggrieved. But a lot of people won't just take to social media; they'll just take their business elsewhere. Not everyone has got time to spend all day arguing on social media about what they think is a fair price of a service.
Yeah.
And we don't need to go over that. It's well trodden between things that Tom's put on his podcast and explained. This is what makes up a taxi fare. Jamie, you and I have spoken about these things before. I mentioned these things numerous times. When we've got tariff coming up, this weekend, and Peter saying we don't need another price rise, and we'll price ourselves out the marketplace and bits and pieces. But we've got this protection. It's well founded. This taxi cost index, it should never be arbitrary. And if that is not protecting the industry from inflation and other things that are coming into the marketplace, then something's fundamentally wrong with the cost index. But turning it down just seems like the craziest notion to me, because the market has got some protection here, and TfL, they are, annually. There's been the odd time where it hasn't gone through and whatever, but by and large, they speak with the tariff committee and whatever, and they implement what is essentially a neutral position for a cabbie going forward. And that's what we need. And I wouldn't want to be giving that up anytime soon, because the meter is sacrosanct, and that's my big issue with the other taxi apps, is the fact that they're undermining the meter, and by undermining the meter, you're putting the whole trade at risk. And drivers. They can take the attitude of, well, I can't work without the other apps. They're making up 20%, 50% of my revenue, and if I didn't have that now, I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage, and that's fine. Everyone's got to do what is right for them, but they've now got choices where they can get on with taxi-centric businesses that I think that are well established and have good relationships with a lot of drivers, and they can get behind those businesses. That's not financially getting behind it and whatever. No one's asking for any money. It's just support with your time. And if the jobs come up, potentially maybe run a little bit further than ordinarily you might want to. But let's take that business from the corporates that are taking the business outside of the regulatory structure, and let's put it back where it should be.
Don't think I could have said that any better than you did, Lee, to be honest with you. I think that's absolutely where we should, the direction we should be heading in. Whenever I get a passenger in the cab and they asked about hailing a taxi or how can I book a taxi or anything like that, there's only two things that I give them, and that's a blackcab.com card and a jump card. I promote both in the cab all the time. I don't promote anything else other than those two apps now. And I don't turn the apps on that often, to be honest with you, because I'm doing tours all the time and bits and pieces. But I have turned blackcab.com on, and I have been offered jobs quite often when I've had it switched on. Sometimes not in the right direction, or not saying not in the right direction, but I've sort of gone past it and it will be too difficult to get back to that passenger, so I always reject it if I don't think I'm going to get there in a timely manner, But yeah, I've been offered jobs and I think it's working, to be honest.
Look, I mean, work is going through the app. What we haven't done, and there's a number of reasons behind it, but I mean, Mickey with Unify had managed to sort of onboard about 5,500 customers. And we haven't actually directly marketed those customers, because although the app does enough at the moment, we still think it could do a little bit more. And rather than hit those people with another I'm not going to say sort of like interim product, but a product that, let's call it an 8 rather than a 10. We don't want to have another bite at those customers for them to come along and say, I wish this done these other couple of things that are missing, like in-app payment as an example. We deliberately kept in-app payment out of the first iteration. But, we have customers contacting us and saying, can I register my card? Can I register my card? And we know that that's a drawback because people they've got used with other people who will remain unnamed. They jump in, they get to the end of their journey, they jump out, it's all done in the app, and off they go. And as much as it's pretty easy to use a payment terminal in the back of the taxi, it's not quite as seamless. And obviously we're going to get to that point within the next couple of months that we'll launch it. But when you're sort of live testing, if you like, obviously we're past beta testing and we're in the live environment and jobs are going through, and there's no complaints, touch wood, at the moment, and you're getting some feedback from drivers and from passengers about what they would like to see. Most of these things are covered, and some of them are ready, but we're just not quite ready to launch it because, again, we're just testing scalability. I mean, you get thousands of people on the platform, but you don't get sort of thousands of jobs at the same time. So you just don't know how it's going to react when it's, seeing some real volume. At the moment, it's a trickle. I mean, you get a few jobs here and there during the course of the day that cascades to be like a reasonable number. Other days it doesn't. It's all very hit and miss. And because we're 2 months now into what could be, like the next 10 years, as it were. So it's still incredibly early days. But there is an untapped customer base, which I'm sure that they're using other apps. They're not just waiting for Unify to come back online, but when people are saying, well, what about the Unify customers? We've made a concerted effort not to sort of go back to them and say, this is the new us, as it were. We've done that with the drivers. Unify is becoming Black Cab. Your Unify app's not going to work going forward. This is the way forward. Most people onboarded, which was good, and we really creating our own customer base from scratch. And what we're seeing is, and I'm sure you guys would see this yourself. It's we're maybe not generating enough new customers, but the ones that we are generating, we're seeing them use the app, multiple times. And that's obviously very encouraging that, even though that we think that there's a couple of shortcomings in the app and whatever, the customer is willing to give it a go, and they're getting a good enough experience to stick with it. And as we make those improvements, I'm hoping there'll be no reason for them to go elsewhere because they are getting regulated fares from regulated drivers in regulated vehicles, at the regulated fare. And that's really what a taxi driver does the knowledge for, and the passenger understands that's what they're buying into, that price assurance and security and peace of mind that the service offers.
It's probably a good thing that you're only getting a trickle, or as you say, sometimes it's a trickle, sometimes like a small waterfall of passengers using the app at the moment while you're live testing. Because if you had a mass use of it all of a sudden and it all sort of fell over, then that wouldn't be a good thing either, Lee, would it?
No, look, I mean, when we do updates at Cabvision, we're doing updates for thousands of customers, and then obviously you can brick their terminal as an example. Sometimes what I didn't understand when we sort of said we're going to do this project was the enormity of the amount of apps that we'd actually be running under the Black Cab banner, because at Cabvision, we have the driver app, which is basically Android or Apple. And there is no passenger app. And here we've got the Android app for both the customer and the passenger. And then we've got like the admin panels at the back end and whatever, and they're running, you know, a couple of apps as well. So now we've sort of like got 6 apps under the same hood. You know, it's really multiplied the work. And as I said, you know, I'm not like a real geek. I've got some understanding of how it works. You know, I look at all sort of like the maps and things and whatever, but yeah, I'm not a programmer. I'm saying, why is this taking so long? And these guys are saying, well, because we've done this, because we've done that, blah, 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 blah. And as we're saying, it's like you don't want scale on day one, because there are an awful lot of things that can go wrong. And as you're, you know, plodding along, and you know, as you say, it starts trickling and then it starts cascading. Hopefully, it starts running. It's a waterfall at some point. That would be your blue sky scenario. You know, you've had your time. You've learned your lessons. You've raised your capacity where you've needed it. You've made tweaks where you've needed it. We've got, you know, really good tech guys internally that work incredibly hard. I mean, obviously with payment, you need to keep that up, you know, 365 days a year, 24/7. You know, obviously we're reliant on third parties because, you know, bank settlement or whatever. We're not a bank, even though a lot of our customers seem to think that we are in that sense. But you know, if Barclays are doing maintenance, then there's no way for us to settle drivers until Barclays maintenance window has come back online. And then you'd get that, what we say, like the reasonable expectation. Is it a reasonable expectation that drivers should think that we should have a backup account with all the money in it to pay the money from our backup bank because Barclays are having a 6-hour window and we can't pay until 6 o'clock in the evening rather than before sort of like midday? It's just not practical for a company of our size to have that much money, you know, in a secondary location effectively for a few hours because, you know, one of the biggest banks in the world and whatever is doing maintenance. And, you know, we run a 24/7 service, 365. So when people are talking about, well, what about the costs? You know, you're going to sink a load of money, you're going to lose your money and bits and pieces. Like, well, Vision started once and we had 1 customer, then we had 2, then we had 10, then we had 1,000, then we had whatever. And it takes time. We already running help desk 24/7. We already know that drivers, you know, need support for putting documents online or changing their bank details. We know that passengers leave stupid amounts of property in the backs of cabs. I mean, 1 in 5 phone calls that we get at Cabvision is a lost property. Now, that just costs us money. You know, we are just trying to reunite that customer with the item that they left. They think it's our responsibility because, of course, they're all of our cabs and everyone's our driver. And why can't you get in touch with your driver? And you know, this was my aunt's glove and it's got sentimental value and I need it back now. We have people in place for all that. You know, we have compliance, we have marketing. So, you know, we're effectively utilizing the infrastructure of a very stable business within the ecosystem, you know, to bring this new enterprise. And because we don't have those startup costs, we feel that, you know, we've got a model that the drivers can buy into, which is basically not be dependent on the driver for the money.
Yeah, you got a bit of a head start to a certain extent, Lee, haven't you? With Cabvision in the background and the driver base, you've got a bit of a head start, but you haven't got the, as you say, you haven't got the startup costs and you haven't got things like that. Getting back to a point you made earlier, where someone come in complaining about the job. So I was on a WhatsApp group and someone posted a link to blackcab.com and said, is it worth it? Has anyone used it? Is it worth it? And I replied to him and I said, it doesn't cost you anything to download the app. You're not going to get charged any commission on the app. It's totally free of charge. So it's a no-brainer. Why would you not download it and use the app? And that's to any cab driver in London. Why would you not download it and use it? It's a no-brainer to a certain extent.
I mean, what goes through some of our customers' minds, I don't want to speculate on that. Another guy said to us, I've downloaded it, it's taken up space on my phone. It's like, yeah, well, it would do. It's going to take up space on your phone. It's not doing any harm to your phone. It's not burning out your data and whatever. And it might just pop you up something when you least expect it, and that might suit your working pattern because, obviously, there's no obligation for you to take the job. If it pops up and it's a good one. I myself I've used the app. I've gone to the airport a few times. Once I was picked up by a Cabvision customer. It's all random. There's no sort of like preferences to any drivers and whatever. Once I got in with a guy that who had someone else's card system in the back of the vehicle. He told me he was on his third job, which was obviously just great to hear. He asked me how I knew about the app. So obviously I explained to him, that. Yeah, but I knew what was going on with it, and I had more than just a fleeting interest. But it was one of those scenarios, though, Jamie, where you mentioned something earlier about the fact that like the customer and the unverified customer, and not being there. Now, I live very central. I'm in SW7, and you'd think it'd be very easy for me to get a cab, but at certain times it's really not very easy. And when I sent the message out, the driver who picked it up was in Buckingham Palace Road, and I was like, oh. And then I saw the driver, and he's actually one of our customers. It didn't matter whether or not he's our customer or not. I was going to wait because obviously I knew how the process works. But I was speaking to Danny, the guy who picked me up, and I just said to him, I'm not sure whether or not like the Joe Public or whatever would have waited. Now, in that time that I did wait for him, which was probably was a good 10 minutes. It might have pushed 15 minutes, by the time that he actually got there. But I actually didn't see another cab in that period. So the option was not given to me to say, drop this guy on his 1.5 mile running or whatever, because there's something passing me by. But I can totally imagine scenarios where the customer is there and going, oh, there's the cab, drop the job. And what we've been saying to customers when they've asked that question is look, set your run in low, 500 meters, 1,000 meters, or whatever it is. And if you get dropped, you've lost a few minutes. But you don't want to be running at this moment in time like a couple of miles, to pick something up, because if there's no commitment from the customer, I'm not saying it's a 50-50, but there is obviously a fair chance that if they're in a central location, another cab comes by, they decided they no longer want to wait, you've wasted some of your time and whatever. And that's a difficult circle to square off, basically.
Well, there's always different customer use cases, isn't there? Like, they might still be sort of half sat in the restaurant when they've ordered it, and then for them to have the cab wait a little bit longer, still coming to them was kind of nice. They can just sit there and relax for a little bit. When I used to live up in North London for a bit, those run-ins can be appropriately extrapolated out a bit more. In central, like you say, like Buckingham Palace Road to SW7, you'd want it to be a shorter time period. But if you're up in Highgate or something, most of the customers I would speak to who'd pick up jobs on the app know that the driver's coming in, and they would allow about up to 10, 15 minutes because they know they're not going to have a steady stream of customers. Sometimes it's welcome that they get to have a bit of chance to wait, or they anticipate that. They know that because they're a little bit more out of central, it will take 10, 15 minutes or whatever.
No, look, you're 100% right. And again, when we're talking about things internally, we are debating on, different zones if you're in a suburb, I'm Essex born, but I live in town now and whatever. But if I was out in Essex, and I'm not talking about deepest Essex, but sort of like East London part of Essex, and I was around Wanstead or Woodford or something, and I might have wanted to be going into town, there is a chance that you could get a black cab from there. But for someone to run 2 miles because I don't know they're in South Woodford and they're going to come to Woodford or something, well, the guy could be there in 5 to 10 minutes. There's going to be no problem to him. But then to say to someone, I don't know, I'm at Berkeley Square and they're at Harley Street. Now, maybe that's less than a mile. But the guy's going to look at that and say, no chance. Like, it could take me 15, 20 minutes to get there. And also the risk of a passing cab picking up that job. And I think that the driver just has to be sensible when they weigh this stuff up and say, yeah, I'm going to give that a go. When Danny picked me up in the morning, it was, very, very early. He was out early. I was out early. I needed to get to the airport. And he's taken a chance that he'll run. And during that period, that another cab wouldn't cross my path. And that worked out perfectly for him. And as I said, there was no other cab. So I didn't have that luxury of saying, I'll go sooner. But these are the trade-offs, and we've been trying to sort of like educate the driver side of it. Why should you get on board? That there is no risk. And then you'd have people saying, well, you'll just sell out, you'll just do this, you'll just do that. And of course, again, you can try and give every reassurance that you can, and people will draw their own conclusion. And then you have people saying, well, you'll just put your prices up. And we're saying, well, we've made a concerted effort, in our advertising, even on the vehicles, to basically be saying like no commission. So we've kind of broke one of the cardinal advertising rules where we've got dual messaging on the same advert. So we are targeting the consumer and the driver in the same ad. And any ad person will tell you, don't do that. That's mixed messaging. Who's your target audience? You shouldn't be doing this stuff. But we wanted to give so we're targeting the consumer from the exterior of the cab. That's who we're looking for. But we've put on it no driver commission because we want the driver to understand, listen, mate, you're also our customer. And we're telling everyone there is going to be no commission on this service because we want to get the customer to buy in that says, yeah, well, this guy is going to come and pick me up because he's not going to get sidetracked seduced by someone standing by the side of the road with a hand on that run-in. Because if he comes to me and he's got to pay someone else 18%, then obviously the hand on the street, is an 18% premium in the driver's favour, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of obvious in that regard.
That's a very, very important thing for passengers. Even the fact that, taking that out of the equation, that they might go and get a passenger off the street. A lot of passengers are absolutely disgusted at the amount of money that, is taken from the driver in commission by some of the other apps. And they do favour apps that don't charge the drivers as much or don't charge the drivers anything at all. So I have found in my experience, it is an important issue for passengers.
No, I think that a lot of our regular users understand the challenging of the economics of running a taxi, right? I mean, we talk in big numbers and go, oh, the cab with finance is 100 grand, and all. Of course, they're not all 100 grand and whatever. The passenger understands, well, this is a bespoke vehicle. This guy is invested in the knowledge. He wants to get a return on investment. There's some skill around this. So, and then they want to kind of support your local kind of business, right? So they come in to see like the cabbie, trusted, sole trader, heritage within London. I know you do your tours, Jamie, and whatever. So again, I'm teaching you to suck eggs a bit here, right? But I think that in sort of like the cohort where I come from a financial background, as I say, I live in town. I'm socialize with a lot of decision makers and whatever, and I hear the things that they say about the service. Why am I happier in a cab rather than using Black Lane or something like that? They're like, these guys are like, they're proper professionals. And I know we can argue about, quote unquote, is every cabbie the same? Does everyone take it as, is everyone as serious about the whole thing? There's some bad cabbies, there's some bad apples, etc., and whatever. But the general public trust the service. And I still think, despite the fact that we see all the arguments and some unsavoury things going back on social media and whatever, which is not showing the trade in a very positive light. Thankfully, that's really just our trade just arguing with each other, I think, and I don't think too many people on the outside get to see that. Which is a real bonus for us, because I think that we'd lose a lot of trade if people actually saw some of the nonsense that was going on from what they believe is trusted people in a trusted service. But the general public still believe that we are the safest service that is out there. And if you want to get from A to B quickly, then you get yourself a proper taxi. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. That is the USP here, really. Like the regulation of the service, and that everyone has got this basically common credential, which is the knowledge, and it is very revered. And people outside of the industry, they're super impressed about the knowledge. I mean, it obviously is an incredibly hard test. Levels of fortitude, hardship. Everyone's got their stories of going through it and whatever. And you can make, you could probably do a whole series like every single day on, people's struggles to get through it, to get out there, to be best in class. And I did an interview with someone recently, and I'm saying, like, look, everyone aspires to be best in class. I want Black Cab to be the best taxi app that's there. I want Cabvision to be the best payment company there and whatever. But the black taxi trade is actually world class. Yeah, and it's completely undeniable that it's world class. We've got something special. And what we mustn't allow is for outsiders to basically keep continuing to chip in away at the fabric, because economically it's a challenging business. It's challenging from the driver's perspective. You're competing against 100,000 imposters doing a very similar job, right? They're doing it in cheaper vehicles. They haven't got the investment in the training. If I relate that to ourselves, I look at that and I see people say, like, with handheld as an example, and say, like, well, I use my handheld because it's cheaper. And say, but that person's not giving you the same level of service that we're giving. We're working within the regulations that are set by Transport for London. And if we didn't have to do certain things here and whatever, we could process payments cheaper. But for us to be an approved supplier, we have to meet a certain standard. And if TfL want it to be a complete free for all and whatever, we can we can compete more on price, but of course the trade-off there is the service. But I think from a taxi trade, we cannot trade off that service, and that service has got to be at a price that is affordable to the consumer. And we can't allow people to take ourselves outside of the regulated fare structure. And it's coming all the way back round to the beginning, and that's why we're here, basically. We are going to do our best to give drivers a platform that they can support, that's no cost to them, and we can give the consumer what they're paying for within the regulated structure.
Yeah. Lee, just for people that don't know you, your family's been in the cab trade, involved in the cab trade for a long, 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 long time. Longer than I've been a cab driver, which is 35 years next month. How long have your family been involved in the London taxi trade?
Well, my father founded Cabvision. He did find Cabvision, actually, but KPM was founded in 1975. Obviously, they closed down approximately this time last year, which was 50 years within the trade. my grandfather drove a cab, as did all of his 5 brothers. So I'm not quite sure exactly where it goes back to, but I mean, you're talking about 70 years of my family being involved in taxis. We're still a family-run business. We don't have any external partners. Um, it enables me to be transparent in that sense because, um, if you take a CEO of a company that's got outside finance and outside shareholders and whatever, they're gonna, their obligation effectively is to those shareholders, and they're gonna hide behind effectively the chain of command. And I'm prepared to sort of come on or go down to Heathrow and have conversations with people, not hiding behind any chain of command, because it stops with me. And if there are decisions at Cabvision that people don't like, they can always direct them directly to me, because I am that person ultimately responsible for making those decisions. And I think that with quite a large subset of the marketplace, they will know that I am sort of transparent and available. And I'm hoping that the people that don't know us will look at sort of like the long history within the trade, the fact that we haven't taken outside money, which is not putting us under any pressure to deal with private hire or anyone else for that matter. We row our own boat, and we're firmly in the taxi boat. And I'm not going to say that we're going to go down with the ship, because if the trade was to shrink so much more, we would have to, I'm not talking about going into private hire and whatever, we would have to consider our future in the trade, just like drivers would consider their future. I mean, if there's no taxis to buy, what do we do as a fleet? That is becoming more and more of a worry for that side of the business. Where are you going to get the parts from? Your customers are leaving, obviously, 9-to-1 ratio of people leaving the trade as coming into the trade. But on the positive side of it is, we feel very strongly that that there is going to be like a core, like an elite core of this business that no matter what will survive. And we plan to be around to provide services to those people, for the considerable future. And we still think that there is a bright future, despite the technology that's coming in and autonomous vehicles and bits and pieces. I do think it is a challenge, for new blood to come into the trade. But most people are, I think the average age of a cabbie is now 55. It's not old. Might be old to Tom, but it's not old to the rest of us. And for the next sort of like 10, 20 years, I still believe, caveat, if there is still a vehicle to be bought in London, that this trade has got a future. But we need to keep up with the times. I think we need to support ourselves better. We need to conduct ourselves better. And there's lessons to be learned from me in those words as much as anyone else. There's certain things that I've commented on online that maybe I shouldn't have. Certainly not through a business account, but at the same time, some of the nonsense that gets spouted, and some of the damage that's being done by that. When you feel passionately about something, it's difficult not to be involved. I mean, Tom made some comments the other day that was just throwaway comments about it kind of being tough, and then sort of caused like almost a nigh-on riot, by just telling people what they already knew, that it hasn't been a great period,
No.
and it's just a nonsense. And it's a shame that as a trade that's who we are, but that's what is unique about the trade, that it's made up of this mosaic of individuals. It paints a really great picture when you look at it in the round, and when you look at it on some individual basis, and that, you know, occasionally it's not so great. But you know, I've gone around the houses a bit there, really, to say we've been involved a long time and kind of know our way around the mulberry bush.
Just before we wrap it up, because we're just over an hour now, couple of things that talking to other drivers about the blackcab.com app has been not complaints as such, but suggestions, constructive criticism, shall we put it as. You know, the hailing range on the app, you have to set it every time you open the app. Is there plans in the future to adjust that so that whatever the driver sets it at, when he opens the app again, it will remain at that set, you know, distance?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I alluded to earlier. There's a few things within the current app that require tweaks. You know, you have to prioritize, Jamie, you know, when you're doing these things and whatever. And for someone to go, oh, I've got 2 button clicks here and whatever.
Doesn't bother me, but...
Well, no, we appreciate that it is a bit annoying. I mean, you know, we've all got our favourite kind of apps, and they probably all do something that, you know, that you wish that they wouldn't. I mean, I'm
to some extent, Lee, I think when, you know, to have it on at the actual screen, on the map screen, when you're working the app, you know, as you move out of London, if you've got a job going out, you know, it's easy to make the hailing range wider, so that you could potentially get a job in a wider range of when you're sort of on the outskirts of London, and then quickly shrink it down again when you're in the centre of London. Whereas in the other apps, it's not that easy to adjust it as such.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I don't know the other apps sort of inside and out. You know, Mickey had sort of spec'd a lot of the things originally in the app. You know, he's a driver at the end of the day. We did some sort of round table stuff with some customers, asked them, what do you like on, you know, give us the 3 features that you like, and give us the 3 things that you really don't like. As I said, I mean, you know, we're not really doing a huge amount of innovating. You know, we're not reinventing the wheel, you know. And we will make the tweaks as to the customer's desires, really. I mean, you're not the first person that's raised that about the radius. You know, people say about, once I've sort of done the one-time password and I'm logged in, I just want to be logged in constantly, and I don't like the fact that I have to go out. But, you know, we come from like a security side of thing. You know, when you're dealing with payment, you're just looking at everything about being, don't want to get hacked, you know, desperate not to get hacked, don't want any data to be stolen, etc. So we might be a little bit overzealous on a couple of things, and we'll probably soften on that as we get along. But, you know, we're 2 months in. You know, info@cabvision.com. Anyone can send in any feedback to that. We will be grateful for that, good or bad. You know, because we are only going to improve the product, you know, from hearing from the users. And, you know, cabbies are great at telling you stuff to your face. But, you know, it's much easier when it's written down and sort of half a dozen people can see what it was, because someone will tell me as I'm sort of like, you know, leaving the office to get to one of the cabs or something. Oh, Lee, blah, blah, blah. What about this? What about that? I go, yeah, that's a good idea. And by the time I get back in, I've forgotten about it.
Yeah.
You know, having it in writing is really valuable to us.
Or Twitter, which we should have been able to go live on all 3 at the same time. But hopefully we'll revisit this in the future, Lee, and come back to you in a few months' time and see where we are then, and how the app's improved and how you see things going in the future. But thanks so much. This has been fantastic. And you've answered a lot of questions. And everything you've said today resonates with the way I would want to work an app and the way I do work apps. So thanks very much, Lee.
Thanks,
And as
Jamie.
Lee says,
Pleasure being on.
if you want to get in touch, info@blackcab.com. If you want to download the app, blackcab.com, it's a no-brainer, really. I don't see why any black cab driver, any London taxi driver would not want to download the blackcab.com app, open it up and use it. It's a no-brainer. It doesn't cost you a single penny at a time when Free Now are now charging you 24% on a job. There you go. Thanks very much, Lee.
Appreciate it.